This week's topic is documenting and keeping good notes in pipeline. And really the reason we wanted to cover this today is there are obviously places where you send notes and messages, et cetera, in pipeline, but just really going over where you add notes or documentation so that it's most appropriate, so that one, it's easy to find later, and two, you recognize that you can actually attach certain information with certain elements in pipeline instead of having to, let's say, clump them all into notes. Okay, so let me go over to pipeline. I'm going to start on a transaction here because the most obvious place that you add notes is by sending a note or message from pipeline. So we're going to start there. Right now I'm on a transaction. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm sure you've sent notes before, but just a few points about that. So if I'm sending a message, the first thing I wanted to mention is to, in general, make it a practice to send your messages from within pipeline. Because when you're sending it from within pipeline, that is keeping an audit trail of exactly what's been sent from that transaction. Versus if you send it from your email system, it's not going to do that. You can, of course, forward it to pipeline, but that's one additional step. So again, best to actually send it from here. It documents who it was sent to, when it was sent, etc. That way, if you go through an audit, all that information is actually already there. Alrighty? And of course, you can send it to both internal folks as well as drag and drop to any external contacts as well, or agents, although you can just check them there, etc. Okay, so number one, send from pipeline. Next is if you decide to not or don't need to send it to someone, you've got the option of adding a note directly to pipeline without actually sending it to a recipient. In other words, if you just want to add a note to the transaction, there, right, I'm actually adding a note. If I've got some information that needs to be previewed, that'll say preview and add note. But basically, I'm actually adding a note. It'll be displayed down below here instead of displaying it and sending it to someone. Okay, so some people don't realize that it doesn't have to be sent to someone. You can just add it to the transaction there. So just wanted to note that. And then also related to your notes here is audio messages. Just wanted to highlight that because if you're out in the field or maybe working from your device and where it's more difficult to type, recording a message may be more convenient for you, right? So just tapping that record button will allow you to record an audio message to either record into the transaction or send out to someone as an attachment. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to highlight about sending notes. There's obviously a lot that you can do with this. We've got several webinars that relate to sending notes in some fashion. But, and you can look at those, but basically just wanted to mention how you can create those notes to track what you want to actually store in the transaction or send, etc. The one thing I do want to mention, definitely, whenever possible, use message templates because that will save you a ton of time, making it more convenient to get your notes in there and more likely to happen regularly. Okay. Alrighty, so that is sending notes from pipeline. I want to go to the flip side and talk about sending notes to pipeline, because just like documenting it from within, sending it to pipeline gets that information into the transaction. And let's head over here to received emails to see messages that were sent to transactions. This is where they'll be displayed. So whenever anyone sends anything to their transaction mail drop address, which everyone's got their own unique transaction mail drop address, they'll appear here. Like I mentioned, you get a clean thread. So that's one benefit, is having that clean thread of communication related to the transaction. I can click on any email to see the full body of it. If there are any attachments, there'd be a little paperclip there that shows that there are attachments and it would list them there. So again, a full thread. Additional benefit is that it adds an extra layer of privacy, right? Messages that are sent to a transaction mail drop address can only be seen by the agent that sends them, if it's an agent sending them, right? In other words, if an agent sends it, they can only see their own messages. Admins can see all messages, but an agent can only see their own, okay? So it adds that additional layer of privacy that you don't necessarily get when you're sending from the transaction. Because if I'm an agent and I send from the transaction, that information is going to be displayed down in the notes and messages section, right? Down here in the notes and email section, right? So if you want that additional layer of privacy, you can set, instead of sending it from the transaction, send it from your personal or from your email system, and then send it to the transaction's mail drop address. Ready? Also, along that same line, let's head back over to received emails. Since you've got this nice thread of communication that has been sent to this transaction or that's related to this transaction, keep that in mind when you've got emails that you're receiving from other people, right? So you've got stuff coming in from the lender and the buyer and the title company, etc. Just forward those to your transaction mail drop address to go ahead and add them to this thread related to the transaction, okay? So you don't have to print them out or scan them or anything, just forward them to your transaction mail drop address to get them in there. Alrighty? Okay, so let's head back to the transaction here. Another way of documenting information is if you're reviewing a doc and it's missing some information or not quite right for whatever reason, you want to attach the comment that you're going to make related to that document directly to the document. So in other words, let's say I've got an issue, I'm looking at this document, I've got an issue with it, maybe it's missing signatures. I'll go ahead and click the little comment bubble for that particular document and type missing signatures, page 1. And then save that. By doing so, by me, an admin, adding a comment to a doc, it automatically sends that comment to the agent on the transaction, right? So I don't have to do an additional communication to reach out to them. Adding that comment does it all together, okay? As well as keeping the comment specifically related to that doc, okay? And that way, if someone's got a question about this doc, they can actually look at the comment related to it. They don't need to go looking at notes or tests or anything like that. It's directly related to that doc. And one tiny little note just related to that is while we're on it is whenever you're sending a message, if you need to reference this comment, you can always drag it to the message area and it'll nicely format information related to that comment, including the document name, the comment itself, who did it, and the date. And you can see if I preview that message, right, it's nicely formatted. It italicizes the extra information, bolds the title of the doc, etc. Okay, so just a little side feature there whenever you're making those comments. Alrighty, also notes within tasks. And I say this because we encourage you to use them not too verbosely. So in other words, if you've got, let's say I've got a task here and I need to reference some information related to it, not due date related, because you always want to specify that via the actual due date field. But take a look at this example here. Cancel. Earnest money deposit. Right, I can say that it was requested, you know, 1/12/20 or whatever, right? If you've got a brief note, we recommend, again, that they be brief, not verbose, that you want to attach there. You can just, as an admin, you can just go ahead and append it or add it to the end of that task name, okay? Then I can see really quickly here, earnest money deposit, oh, it's been requested. And that's obviously the natural place I'd go to look for it. Here's another example down here, final walkthrough, spoke with Pam on 1/20, she will contact Ken to schedule, etc. That's probably a little longer than we would recommend. It's certainly a possibility though. But you want to keep them as brief as possible because you notice the difference between this here. I can still clearly see here's earnest money deposit and it was requested. Nice and short. I can read through it. This adds quite a bit more, and you can imagine if I've got several of these, it starts to make my task list look harder to go through, harder to read, right? Because I'm reading so many things. So keep them brief, but you do have the ability to add notes there to clarify or to add some status or something to a particular task. And the last thing I wanted to go over is if you ever need to add any information or notes that you only want admins to see, you've got your admin info, which is only visible to admins. So if you edit this field under edit transaction, you can add some admin specific information here, okay? And only admins will be able to see that. And just to be clear, you kind of got some similar abilities that are doc related, right? If you wanted to had some docs that you only wanted admins to see, it could be a doc that contained information that you only wanted admins to see. In other words, you created a doc specifically that had information that you wanted admins to have access to. You can put it into a doc and then put it into a permission category under here, right? A permission category that only admins could see, Office. Right? And then like I mentioned a moment ago, anything that you send to a transaction, any message that you send to a transaction, if you're an admin, only other admins would be able to see it. Agents would not be able to see that. So that's it for how to get your notes and documentation into the right places so that they're easy and intuitive for everyone to find later.